Mike was an experienced truck driver, accustomed to long journeys on the deserted roads of Texas. One night, he received an urgent cargo to deliver to a remote town in the state's interior. The route would be long and lonely as usual, but something in the atmosphere of that night seemed different. Departing from Dallas at dusk, Mike soon found himself enveloped in an oppressive darkness. Fog accumulated on the empty roads, creating a sinister and uninviting environment. At a usual rest stop for truckers, he noticed it was strangely deserted. No sign of life beyond the distant hum of streetlights. He decided to take a brief pause to stretch his legs and check the truck. As he walked around the vehicle, a faint whisper seemed to echo in the fog. Mike was an experienced truck driver, accustomed to long journeys on the deserted roads of Texas. One night, he received an urgent cargo to deliver to a remote town in the state's interior. The route would be long and lonely as usual, but something in the atmosphere of that night seemed different. Departing from Dallas at dusk, Mike soon found himself enveloped in an oppressive darkness. Fog accumulated on the empty roads, creating a sinister and uninviting environment. At a usual rest stop for truckers, he noticed it was strangely deserted. No sign of life beyond the distant hum of streetlights. He decided to take a brief pause to stretch his legs and check the truck. As he walked around the vehicle, a faint whisper seemed to echo in the fog. Turn back, murmured a distant voice. Mike shuddered, but attributed the sound to the cutting night wind. Back in the cabin, he continued his journey, but the persistent whisper began to echo in his thoughts. It was as if the road itself was trying to speak to him, warning him of something unknown. Hours passed on the dark and lonely road. In a moment of exhaustion, Mike spotted a figure by the roadside. A young woman, dressed in an old-fashioned way, was frantically waving for help. Her pale face contrasted with the darkness around her. Without hesitation, Mike stopped the truck. The woman entered the cabin, thanking him with a trembling voice. She introduced herself as Emily and explained that her car had broken down on the deserted road. Mike immediately noticed how cold and trembling her hands were, a disturbing presence in the warmth of the truck. As they drove, Emily seemed distant, absorbed in her thoughts. Mike tried to make conversation to ease the growing tension. It was then that she began to talk about a terrible accident that had occurred on that same road years ago. Emily told the story of a truck driver who lost control of his vehicle on a night of dense fog, colliding with her car and causing the death of her family. She survived the accident but felt trapped on that stretch of road, trying to warn unsuspecting drivers of the imminent danger. Mike felt a chill as he heard the story. Emily's presence in the cabin, her dry clothes despite the fog outside, all contributed to a growing feeling of unease. When they finally arrived at a small cemetery by the roadside, Emily asked to stop. She pointed to a moss-covered tombstone. "It's here. Please leave me here," she whispered, her eyes full of sadness and hope. Mike helped Emily out of the truck. As she touched the tombstone, the fog around began to slowly dissipate. Emily smiled, silently thanking him, before disappearing before Mike's eyes. With his heart still racing, Mike continued his journey to the remote town. He delivered the cargo successfully, but Emily's story remained etched in his mind. He shared his experience with other truckers, warning about the mysteries and dangers that lurk on the deserted roads of Texas. Jake was a young truck driver, enthusiastic about his new career on the roads. He bought a used bright red truck from a peculiar seller who insisted on getting rid of the vehicle for a surprisingly low price. On his first night driving the truck, Jake felt a strange presence, as if he was being watched by invisible eyes. Ignoring the discomfort, he pressed on, crossing winding and poorly lit roads. At a roadside diner, he heard other truckers talking about a cursed red truck. They said its former owner, Sam, died in a terrible accident while driving the same vehicle. Legend had it that Sam's spirit still haunted the truck, causing mysterious accidents to unsuspecting drivers. Jake, apprehensive, tried to dismiss the stories as unfounded superstitions. He returned to the road, but soon began to notice inexplicable events. The truck's radio turned on and off by itself, Whispers echoed from the speakers in moments of silence, and the headlights began to flicker for no apparent reason. On a particularly gloomy night, Jake stopped the truck on the shoulder to investigate mechanical problems. While checking the engine, he saw a dark shadow in the rearview mirror, watching him with empty, lifeless eyes. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. He decided to spend the night at a nearby motel, but the strange events persisted. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridor. Knocks resounded on the door with no one outside. Jake began to feel driven mad by the oppressive presence of the red truck. The next morning, upon returning to the truck, he found a message written on the windshield in red letters. "Leave the truck. It belongs to me." Chilled, Jake decided to investigate more about the vehicle's dark history. He discovered that Sam, the former owner, had made a desperate pact to ensure success on the roads, resulting in his premature death in a terrible accident. It was believed that his spirit sought vengeance or redemption, haunting the truck and those who dared to possess it. Determined to end the curse, Jake located Sam's widow, who shared chilling stories about paranormal events that began after her husband's death. With her help, Jake prepared an exorcism ritual. The following night, he returned to the site of Sam's fatal accident. There, he faced the vengeful spirit, reciting ancient words of power and undoing the dark bond that kept the red truck under Sam's control. The truck shook and shuddered under the pressure of the invisible force. A shadowy figure appeared before Jake, screaming in anger and despair. With a final effort, Jake completed the ritual, breaking the cursed link between Sam's spirit and the red truck. After the confrontation, Jake felt an enormous weight being lifted from his shoulders. The red truck was finally at peace, and Jake continued his career on the roads, more vigilant than ever about the hidden dangers that could lurk beneath the surface of a simple transaction. Lucas was a truck driver known for his generosity in offering rides to strangers on long trips along Interstate 90. On a cold winter night, while crossing a remote area, he spotted a solitary figure on the roadside, waving desperately. Without hesitation, Lucas stopped the truck. A tall, thin man with a tired appearance ran towards the vehicle. He introduced himself as Tom and explained that his car had broken down, leaving him stranded on that freezing night. Tom entered the cabin and thanked Lucas for the ride. However, something about him seemed out of place. His gaze was distant, his hands trembled slightly as he settled into the passenger seat. During the trip, Lucas tried to make conversation to ease the tense atmosphere. However, Tom responded with monosyllables and kept his eyes fixed on the window, as if searching for something in the darkness outside. As they drove down the deserted road, the truck's radio began to play an old, melancholic song, even though it was turned off. Tom seemed to shrink in his seat, muttering to himself, "This song, it brings back bad memories." Lucas began to feel a chill down his spine. Something wasn't right with his passenger. He decided to make a stop at a gas station for a brief rest. Upon returning to the truck, however, he discovered that Tom had disappeared. Worried, he asked the attendant if he had seen where Tom had gone, but received a confused response. "You arrived alone, my friend," said the attendant, with a puzzled expression. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew Tom had been there. As he continued his journey, he decided to research recent accidents in the area. He discovered an article about a man named Tom who had died in a car accident exactly 1 year ago on that same road. His heart raced as he realized he had given a ride to a ghost. He decided to return to the accident site, where Tom's spirit seemed to be strongest. There he began to speak aloud, offering help and comfort to the trapped spirit. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Tom materialized before Lucas, his eyes expressing a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you for bringing me back," Tom said in a weak whisper. "Now I can finally rest." Lucas watched as Tom's spirit slowly dissipated, leaving behind a sense of peace in the cold night air. The truck's radio turned off, and the gloomy atmosphere that had enveloped him since the fateful ride began to disperse. Lucas continued his journey across the country's roads, always remembering the night he gave a ride to a ghost. His story spread among truck drivers, serving as a reminder that not every ride is what it seems, and that generosity can have consequences beyond the expected. On a dark and stormy night, Jack, a veteran truck driver, found himself traveling along the legendary Route 66, a road known for its dark stories and inexplicable events. Jack had always had a fascination with the supernatural, but he never imagined he would become part of one of these stories. As he drove down the deserted road, the torrential rain reduced visibility to almost zero. Lightning cut across the sky, briefly illuminating indistinct figures along the road. In a moment of lightning, Jack saw the silhouette of a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing by the roadside. Curious and concerned about the possibility of someone needing help, Jack stopped the truck. The woman approached slowly, revealing a pale face and sad eyes. She identified herself as Sarah and explained that her car had broken down and she needed to get to the next town as quickly as possible. Jack agreed to take her, even as he felt a chill down his spine. Sarah seemed distant and avoided talking about herself or how she had ended up on that remote road in the middle of a storm. The truck's radio began to malfunction, emitting loud static whenever Jack tried to tune into a station. During the trip, Jack tried to make conversation to dispel the tense atmosphere. Sarah responded vaguely, her eyes fixed on the dark and rainy landscape outside. She briefly mentioned that she was on her way to an unknown destination, avoiding giving specific details. As they progressed along Route 66, the storm seemed to worsen. Jack felt as if they were being followed by an invisible presence, something that lurked in the shadows beyond the truck's headlights. He noticed strange marks on the road, as if something large and heavy had been dragged recently. In a moment of courage, Jack asked Sarah about the strange atmosphere surrounding them. She sighed heavily, her white fingers gripping the truck's seat. "This road holds many secrets," she murmured before refusing to speak more on the subject. As they approached the nearest town, the rain began to let up and the tense silence between them increased. Jack stopped the truck at a gas station and turned to speak to Sarah, only to discover that she had disappeared. Frightened and confused, Jack searched for Sarah around the gas station but found no sign of her. The gas station attendant looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as if he were already accustomed to strange stories along Route 66. Jack decided to research the history of the road and discovered old reports of mysterious disappearances and encounters with supernatural figures along Route 66. Some said the road was a portal to the beyond, where lost spirits wandered in search of redemption or vengeance. Over the years, Jack continued his travels on the country's roads, but he never forgot the night he met Sarah on Route 66. His story became a warning to other truck drivers, reminding them that not all rides are what they seem, and that some roads hold secrets. Ethan Brooks had always been a dedicated trucker. With 20 years on the road, he thought he'd seen it all. But on that cold October night, as he drove down Interstate 80 in Wyoming, his life was about to change forever. The radio crackled, picking up nothing but static. Ethan tried to tune into a station, to no avail. Frustrated, he switched it off. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the sound of tires on asphalt. It was almost 3 a.m. when Ethan spotted a gas station on the roadside. The dim lights flickered as if begging for attention. He decided to stop for coffee and maybe a quick chat with another human being. The place seemed deserted. Ethan entered the convenience store, the door chime echoing in the emptiness. An elderly man appeared from behind the counter, his opaque eyes fixed on Ethan. "Can I help you?" The old man's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Just coffee, please," Ethan replied, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. As the old man prepared the coffee, Ethan noticed a yellowed flyer pinned to the bulletin board. "Warning, truckers missing on I-80. The photo showed smiling faces of men who were never seen again. "Here you go," said the old man, placing a steaming cup on the counter. "Be careful on the road. There are things out there that shouldn't exist." Ethan swallowed hard, paid for the coffee, and left quickly. Back at the truck, his eyes scanned the tarp-covered cargo. It was a strange job. Pick up a sealed container in Salt Lake City and deliver it to Chicago. No questions asked. As he resumed his journey, Ethan couldn't shake the old man's words. The sky was pitch black, no stars in sight. The road seemed to stretch endlessly. That's when he heard it. a muffled sound coming from the cargo. Ethan turned up the radio, trying to ignore it, but the noise persisted. It sounded like scratching. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead. The sound grew louder, more frantic. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Something was moving back there. A violent thud shook the truck. Ethan screamed, struggling to maintain control. He looked in the rearview mirror, and his heart nearly stopped. The tarp was moving, as if something massive was writhing underneath it. Panic overwhelmed Ethan. He floored the accelerator, the truck roaring through the night. But the damned sound wouldn't stop. Scratches, thuds, and now an inhuman howl that chilled his blood. Ethan saw a rest area ahead. Without thinking twice, he swerved in, brakes screeching. He jumped out of the cab, trembling, and ran to the back of the truck. The tarp was torn, the container open. Ethan approached slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. A putrid smell hit him, making him gag. Inside the container, in the shadows, something moved. Red eyes gleamed in the darkness. Ethan tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat. A monstrous form emerged, scaly skin, sharp claws, teeth like daggers. The creature advanced, its mouth opening in a grotesque smile. "Thanks for the ride, Ethan," said the thing, with a voice that seemed to come from hell itself. "I was getting hungry." Ethan tried to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. The creature leaped, its claws slicing through the air. Ethan's scream echoed through the night, quickly silenced. Days later, another flyer would be pinned to that same bulletin board at the gas station. Ethan Brooks' smiling face would join the other missing truckers on I-80. And somewhere in the darkness, a hungry creature waits for its next unsuspecting driver, ready for another journey across America. Rachel Carter loved the freedom of the road. At 35, she was one of the few female truckers in a male-dominated industry. On that winter night, as she drove along Route 66 in New Mexico, Rachel felt particularly lonely. The wind howled outside, whipping snow against the windshield. Rachel adjusted the heater, grateful for the warmth. The radio played an old country song, but static made it hard to distinguish the melody. That's when she saw the figure. A man on the roadside, arm extended in a plea for a ride. Rachel hesitated. Normally she'd never pick up hitchhikers, but something about this man made her stop. He got in quickly, bringing a gust of icy air. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely audible. "Thought I'd freeze out there." Rachel observed the stranger from the corner of her eye. He was pale, almost translucent, with eyes so light blue they seemed white. He wore old-fashioned clothes, as if he'd stepped out of a 1950s photo. "Where are you headed?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just keep driving," he replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I'll know when we get there." An uncomfortable silence settled in the cab. Rachel tried to start a conversation, but the man responded only in monosyllables. Hours dragged on, and a sense of unease grew in her chest. The storm worsened. Rachel could barely see the road. She decided to stop at the next motel she found. That's when she noticed something strange. The odometer wasn't moving. They'd been driving for hours, but the mileage remained the same. "That's impossible," Rachel muttered. The man turned to her slowly, a sinister smile forming on his thin lips. "Nothing's impossible on the road of the dead, Rachel." Rachel's blood ran cold. How did he know her name? She didn't remember telling him. What are you?" Rachel stammered. The man laughed, a cold, empty sound that seemed to suck all warmth from the cab. "I'm the one who collects lost souls on the road, and you, my dear Rachel, have been driving for much longer than you think." Memories began to flood Rachel's mind. Flashes of a night very much like this one. The sharp curve that appeared out of nowhere. The headlights of an oncoming car, blinding her momentarily. The scream stuck in her throat as the truck skidded on the wet asphalt. The impact, the pain, and then darkness. "No," Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It can't be. I'm not. Dead," the man completed, his form now changing, becoming darker, more terrifying. "Oh, but you are, my dear. For 3 years to be exact. This road you're traveling, it's limbo. A place between worlds where lost souls wander, unable to accept their fate." Rachel screamed, slamming on the brakes, but the truck kept moving, cutting through the snowstorm like a ghost. The man's laughter echoed in the cab, mixing with the howling wind. "Why am I here?" Rachel asked between sobs. "Why can't I just go?" The man, no, the entity, looked at her with something that almost seemed like pity in his inhuman eyes. Because you're not ready to leave this life behind. Your love for the road, for the freedom it represents, is too strong. So you keep driving, night after night, reliving your last moments without realizing it. Rachel looked at her hands on the wheel, noticing for the first time how ethereal, almost transparent they seemed. And now, what happens to me? Now, my dear Rachel, you have a choice to make, said the entity. You can continue on this endless journey, trapped between worlds, or you can accept your fate and move on to what comes after. Rachel was silent for a long moment, the tears drying on her face. She thought about her life, the dreams she never realized, the roads she never traveled, but she also thought about the peace she never really found in life. Always restless, always on the move. And if I choose to move on? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. The entity smiled, but this time the gesture seemed almost gentle. Then I'll be your guide, Rachel Carter, to the last stop on your journey. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a weight she didn't know she carried lift. She looked one last time at the road ahead, at the storm that now seemed to calm. I'm ready, she said, letting go of the wheel. The truck began to slow down, the dashboard lights flashing one last time before going out. Darkness enveloped Rachel, but there was no more fear, only a sense of peace, of returning home after a long journey. And so, in the vastness of Route 66, the spirit of Rachel Carter finally found her rest. The ghost truck disappeared into the night, taking with it the last memories of a lost soul. Days later, authorities would find Rachel Carter's truck overturned in a ravine along Route 66, covered by 3 years of snow and desert dust. The mystery of her disappearance finally solved, but Rachel's true journey would remain a secret, guarded by America's lonely roads. Some say that on stormy nights, especially on that stretch of Route 66, you can see a ghost truck traveling the road, and if you look closely, you might see a smiling woman at the wheel, finally at peace on her last journey. Dylan Hawkins was exhausted. After 14 straight hours driving his truck along Interstate 10 in Texas, his eyes struggled to stay open. Coffee no longer had any effect, and the white lines on the road seemed to dance before him, dangerously hypnotizing. At 42, with nearly 2 decades of experience on the roads, Dylan knew he was reaching his limit. He had lost count of how many times he'd nodded off in the last few miles, waking up startled and abruptly correcting the truck's direction. The radio played some country song, but Dylan could barely focus on the lyrics. His thoughts were at home, with his wife Sarah and their 2 children. Just one more delivery, and he'd have a whole week off. The prospect of hugging his family was the only thing keeping him awake. That's when he saw the sign, "Last gas station for 200 miles. Dylan sighed in relief. A quick stop was exactly what he needed to recompose himself and finish the trip safely. The station seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, an oasis of flickering neon light in the darkness of the Texas desert. Dylan maneuvered his truck into the empty parking lot, noticing how strangely well-maintained the place looked for being in the middle of nowhere. Stepping down from the cab, Dylan felt the hot, dry desert air hit his face. The contrast with the truck's air conditioning made him shiver slightly. He looked around, noticing the absolute silence that enveloped the place. Not even the sound of night insects could be heard. The convenience store was lit up, its shelves full of products gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Dylan pushed the glass door, the tinkle of the bell announcing his arrival. A young attendant was behind the counter. She smiled as Dylan entered, her teeth unnaturally white under the artificial light. "Welcome to the final stop," she said, her voice melodious. "How can I help you?" Dylan asked for coffee and permission to use the bathroom. The attendant nodded, pointing to a door at the back of the store. "Feel free," she said, still smiling. In the bathroom, Dylan splashed cold water on his face, trying to shake off the fatigue. As he was drying off, he noticed something strange in the mirror. For a moment, he swore he saw not his reflection, but the face of a much older man, with empty eyes and gray skin. He blinked quickly, and the image vanished. "I really need sleep," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. Back in the store, Dylan found his coffee waiting on the counter. The attendant watched him with a fixed smile that somehow no longer seemed so friendly. "How much do I owe you?" Dylan asked, reaching for his wallet. "Oh, don't worry about it," she replied, waving her hand. "Consider it on the house, but there is something you could do for us." Dylan raised an eyebrow, suddenly suspicious. Years on the road had taught him to be cautious of offers that seemed too good to be true. And what would that be? The attendant slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. "Just deliver this message to the next station. That's all." Dylan hesitated, looking at the paper as if it were a snake about to strike. But something in his fatigue, in his desire to finish the trip soon, made him reach out and take the note. After all, what harm could there be in delivering a simple message? "All right," he said, tucking the paper into his shirt pocket. "I'll do it." The attendant's smile widened. "Excellent. Have a good trip, Mr. Hawkins." Dylan froze. He didn't remember giving his name. But before he could question it, the attendant had already turned away, busying herself with something at the back of the store. Back in the truck, Dylan felt strangely invigorated. The coffee had an odd taste, but it seemed to have chased away all the fatigue. The miles began to pass quickly, the desert landscape unfolding monotonously under the starry sky. It wasn't long before Dylan spotted another station in the distance. He frowned, confused. There shouldn't be another station for at least 200 miles according to the sign he'd seen earlier. When he stopped, a sense of déjà vu hit him hard. The station looked identical to the previous one. Same neon lights, same store layout. Even the attendant, when he entered, seemed the same. "Welcome to the final stop," she said, with the same unsettling smile. Dylan felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was very, very wrong. I have a message to deliver," he stammered, extending the paper with trembling fingers. The attendant took it, her eyes gleaming unnaturally. When she read the message, her smile widened, revealing teeth as sharp as razors. "Ah, Dylan," she said, her voice now a hiss that seemed to come from all sides at once. "We've been waiting for you." The lights flickered and suddenly the store was full. Dozens of pale, cadaverous figures, all wearing faded trucker uniforms. Dylan recoiled in horror, recognizing some faces from missing person posters he'd seen over the years. What is this?" Dylan shouted, his voice choked with terror. The attendant laughed, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell. "This, dear Dylan, is the true final stop, the place where lost truckers come for their last rest." The figures began to approach, their skeletal hands extended towards him. Dylan ran to the door, only to find it locked. He turned, cornered, his heart beating so hard it seemed about to leap from his chest. "Don't you understand, Dylan?" The attendant continued, her form now changing, becoming something inhuman and terrible. "You never left the first station. In fact, you never arrived there." Memories began to flood Dylan's mind. The extreme fatigue, his eyes closing for 1 second too long. The truck veering off the road, rolling violently. The pain, the fear, and then nothing. "No," whispered Dylan, tears streaming down his face. "It can't be. Sarah, the kids." That defy human understanding.